notorious for saying, after a take, you know, do it again, faster, more intensity. He certainly said to me, was, you know, it's terrific, Tommy, can you do it again faster? But that's it, I didn't get more intensity. I don't think 3PO with more intensity would be bearable, do you?
I said all systems have been alerted to your presence, sir. The main entrance seems to be the only way in or out.
We all had to fill in a lot of the blanks. It was more a matter of if we did something he didn't like, he'd tell us, rather than telling us what to do.
I think George likes people. I think George is a warm-hearted person. But he's a little impatient with the process of acting, of finding something, you know. And he thinks it's there. It's right there. I wrote it down, you know. Just do that. You know, sometimes you can't just do that and make it work.
He's really focused on what he's trying to do and get everything right, and the smoke right, and the squibs go off right, and we're just taunting him mercilessly.
Kerry and Mark have a wicked sense of humour. Kerry was very young, and Mark was very young. So they were the junior division, and they were always larking about on set. So it kept us in stitches.
I got one outfit for the first movie, and as George taught me, there is no underwear in space. Instead of that, there is gaffer tape. So I was taped down. And I used to say we should just make up a contest on the call sheet as who's going to rip it off. But we didn't do that.
We were all goofing around and trying to make George crack, because he really looked like he was ready to burst into tears, and you try and cheer him up.
Okay, cut it. And.
The mic was in frame.
The mic was in picture.
Oh.
The mic was in picture. The mic was in picture.
Back to first position.
The sound department has to pay up. That to him was really inappropriate humor at the time, because I'm sure he's in the zone and he's seeing what he wants to do, and we're just like actors trying to stave off boredom because, you know, we've been in the trash compactor all morning.
Ready, and action!
What happened?
I don't know, it just disappeared.
I got a really bad feeling about this. But it is amazing what you can do when you have a vision, when you have an ambition, and when you can bend other people's will to your desire. And the thing that kept it focused towards the ambitions was George's vision and his passion for the idea.
Perhaps the most memorable stunt in Star Wars was actually performed by Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher. The nick-of-time escape of Luke and Leia across a yawning chasm in the Death Star.
Mark Hamill wanted to do as much as he could himself. I had times when I had to keep him back because he was too enthusiastic, actually, and he could have got hurt. Princess Leia and Luke Skywalker had to swing over this void. We couldn't afford stunt doubles, so I said to George, well, I can teach them to do this and be quite safe. My buddy and I, we put the harnesses on, we put the wires on. Everyone down below, because remember, we're about 20 meters up, looking down on them, right? And as we swung across, there was a terrible tear. And my buddy said to me, Peter, your harness has snapped. And Mark, he said, I'm not going in that, it's too dangerous. And this is where I discovered you had to be a good liar. I said, no, there's nothing wrong with the harness. I split my trousers as I landed. He said, oh, I thought it was the harness. I said, Mark, I wouldn't let you go on this if it was dangerous. You know, they did it, as you know, in one take, and that's how we got it. Good luck.
That was really early on in the shoot, when I was still worried about my weight. And I thought that we were going to miss, and I'd hit the wall, and they will say, still too tubby. Let's bring in Jodie Foster.
Another of Peter Diamond's tasks was choreographing the dramatic lightsaber battle between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi.
You can't win, Darth. If my blade should find its mark, you will cease to exist. And I warn you, if you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine.
George, he wanted a broadsword tiger fight with a touch of Japanese behind it. But instead of becoming samurai moves with one hand, I kept it with 2 hands. So all the moves were 2 hands, completely like that. The first swords were bits of wood with from projection material wrapped around them. Now the hardest thing for me on the first fights, Darth Vader was a very heavy man. Obi-Wan Kenobi was a gentleman, right, who had done some dancing in the theatre. I had to teach them, if that was the sword, to stop before they touched, because the blades were breaking. We broke so many blades, they just kept snapping.
Across the Atlantic, Fox's head of production, Alan Ladd Jr., continued to offer Lucas his main, if not his only, support from the studio.
Well, there was a lot of problems, yes. I mean, every board meeting I attended, I mean, the subject was always about Star Wars. Well, the costs are rising, it's this, it's that. Look, we've read drafts of scripts that make no sense to us in any way, shape, or form, and it was rather unpleasant. The things that stick in my mind that made me laugh were like memos worried about whether or not the Wookiee should have pants. They're looking at this thing and saying, couldn't he have some lederhosen? And I thought, isn't this great, you know? Of all the things to worry about, the Wookiee has no pants.
I think we were like 2 weeks over schedule. At that point, the board of directors at Fox started to panic and tell Alan Ladd Jr. that he had to shut that film down regardless. And so he came to me and said, look, you've got to finish in the next week because I got another board meeting and I can't go in there and say we're still shooting.
I kept going on the phone to their production department saying, this is insane. If we put on a second crew to do this, it costs us more than going an extra week. And they said, it doesn't matter. The studio's opinion is that the day deadline is more important than the money you spent.
The final scenes were filmed at breakneck speed, with Lucas frantically bicycling from one soundstage to another.
Well, I think George suffered a lot more than I was aware of at the time, but I was very focused on what I was doing because this was a very busy movie. It was just non-stop, dawn to dusk. We did go over at the end, and we split into 3 units right at the end, and Gary directed the 2nd unit, and I had the distinction of directing the 3rd unit of Star Wars. My shots were things like close-up of R2-D2's 3rd foot going down. Nothing too dramatic, but that's how we finished it.
Come on. I'm up. I hope that old man got the tractor beam out of commission, or this is going to be a real short trip. Okay, hit it!
Fox originally slated Star Wars for a Christmas release in 1976. But the difficult shoot had put the film severely behind schedule.
Can we just leave this party? Give us a growl.
We are ready to come all friends.
Is the ship all right?
Seems okay. If we can get to it. I just hope the old man got the tractor beam out of commission.
Look.
Now's the chance. Go!
With barely 6 months to go, there was almost no chance of delivering the project on time.
I just finished shooting the movie and I was exhausted, basically, but I had to go right from the shooting into the finishing without a break.
Already anxious about meeting his deadline, Lucas was shocked when he saw the first assembly of his edited film that spring.
There, the Greuters are losing power! All right. I'll get it.
The first cut of Star Wars was an unmitigated disaster.
How's that? Yes, it's much better.
I started to see things cut together. I wasn't happy with it. I come in on weekends and I recut the film on my own.
Okay.
And I tried to get the editor to cut it my way, and he didn't really want to, and so I had to let the editor go. So I had no editor. I was behind schedule. I had to race to finish the movie.
177, take 2.
Lucas realized his only hope was to start from scratch.
And I am C-3PO, human-cyborg relations. And this is my counterpart, R2-D2.
Oh, hello. To recut the movie, he hired Paul Hirsch and Richard Chew. And for several months, he was able to borrow his wife, Marcia, who was editing New York, New York, with Martin Scorsese.
Take 250, take 7. Action.
You must do what you feel is right, of course.
Right now, I don't feel too good.
On Star Wars, the trio's first task was to give the film an energy and pace that was sorely lacking.
It was cut in a very traditional manner of just playing things out in masters and then going into the coverage, and let the actors' rhythms dictate the cuts rather than having the cuts kind of drive the rhythm of the scenes.
211, take 3, guide track. Action!
So consequently, there wasn't any excitement in the footage the way that it had been put together.
Richard and I would sort of leapfrog. If he was on reel 1, I would grab reel 2. And then when whoever finished that would grab reel 3, and then so forth. We used shots up until the very last frame.
Take another one.
Very often, the very next frame would be the flash of the camera stop. For instance, there's a shot of one of the sand people. He knocks Luke down, and then he holds his weapon up over his head, and he just did it once, and we rocked it back and forth, so he did it a number of times. The only things that are there is what's presentable, and everything behind the scenes is a mess.
With no chance of being ready by Christmas, a new release date was set for summer 1977. Some doubted that the movie would ever reach theaters. But as bad as things had been with the editing, the situation at ILM was even worse. The company was trying to create effects that had never been done before. They knew what they wanted to accomplish, but they had yet to create anything usable for the film.
They had spent half their budget, and ultimately I had about 4 shots, none of which I would accept. They were just not good. That was pretty much of a low point. I had no special effects, and I didn't even know whether we were going to get the ships to work. So it was a pretty desperate time, and we'd spent half the budget, building the motion control cameras and setting the shop up, and it was a disaster, to say the least.
The factory has to be built before the first can of peas can be sent to the supermarket, and I think it was a year or more without any film coming out, without one shot being finished, because they were building optical printers, they were building cameras, we were building models.
I know that George was disappointed in the work, and I'm disappointed that he was disappointed, but there's a certain subjectivity to some of that stuff. I wish he'd been happier, but I also think that ultimately the work did the job.
When word of the various post-production problems reached the Fox board of directors, they decided they'd had enough of George Lucas and that science movie.
I just said that one executive committee meeting when they were hauling me over the coals, they just said it's the greatest picture ever made. That ended the conversation. They were afraid to say, well, you're stupid and you're wrong, and we want you out of this building by 5 o'clock this afternoon. So, there were some tense moments there.
With the dismal early cut of the film, ILM in chaos, and growing pressure from the studio, Lucas was facing almost unbearable battles on a daily basis. After an especially tense trip to ILM, Lucas felt sharp chest pains. Fearing a heart attack, the director checked into a Marin County hospital. He was diagnosed with hypertension and exhaustion, and was warned to reduce his stress level.
At that point, I really felt that I'd gotten myself into a real mess, and I didn't know whether I was going to get it out.
Lucas doubled his efforts to save Star Wars. The situation at ILM required drastic measures. To get the film's crucial special effects back on track, Lucas had no choice but to step in personally.
We put a production department in the special effects company. I went down there twice a week.
There was a certain amount of resentment at first because they felt that they were being challenged a bit on how they had set it up. We felt that there was a certain quasi-hippie mentality that some of them had about the schedule.
Ultimately, I guess we were known as a country club.
I think I'd look to those guys that there needed to be a really strong production force in there that was going to meet some sort of quota.
With hundreds of shots left to be completed, ILM would have to do a year's worth of work in just 6 months. But Lucas